Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to I guess you could say a prologue sort of a stream to the main event, which will be on Nathan Hood's channel. It's it's something that sort of came up during his stream, where I think it was like a sort of just a sort of chill out stream, where he was talking about Middle Earth content, Lord of the Rings, that sort of stuff, and we also got into sort of chatting about Elder Scrolls lore, and we then sort of mentioned elite theory and what have you. And Apostolic Majesty, who runs a history sort of history channel, and you'll find sort of like a two tier playlist on his channel, which is Nations of Charlemagne and Orthodoxy, which I recommend watching, because it's really informative, especially for around the Holy Roman Empire, which I've really learnt a lot on. So I really recommend checking that out. But he was also there as well, and I think Columba as well, who's his co-host, was also around for that. And we were just talking about Elder Scrolls and everything, and what the sort of connections it has with real world events in history, inspirations, and also what the sort of messaging you get from it, and just looking at sort of a more sort of deeper autistic level of of the society, sort of a deep lore sort of stuff. And I just, for people who are watching this who aren't don't know the Elder Scrolls universe, then this may not be the stream for you, because this is going to go quite into sort of nerdy levels of sort of analysis. So that being said, I have actually done an Elder Scrolls related stream quite some time ago on this channel. I think it was with Joz and I think Economic Erudite, blast from the past sort of name. That was a few years ago, and I think that was on the Third Empire. We were looking at the Third Empire, so which is really where our this sort of story, what I'm going to be talking from, starts from, or the end of the Third Empire and the beginning of the the Mede, or I guess you say like an interregnum period, where you have anarchy, probably not anarchy, but decentralization and breakaways, until the Clovian warlord himself, the Medes, Titus Mede the First, raises armies, conquers well, I think it was a bandit army, and conquers Clovia, and then marches on the Heartlands, which is the imperial city, and from there is crowned emperor, and then goes on to reconquer most of Tamriel. The only ones he couldn't sort of go for was, of course, Outmere. The Somerset Isles, or Outmere, which is the place of the Ultima Dominion, the Ultimary Dominion. But I think it was. Let's see. Yeah. So he goes on to reconquer all the human realms, plus elsewhere the lands of the Khajiit, and that's about it. The Black Marsh goes independent. You have a nationalist group, which is sort of the leading head figure on that. So we're going to go into all of that, what happens there. Just a few points just to sort of get the ball rolling. This stream's going to be looking at the lore. So there's things that have happened in the Elder Scrolls universe where, and this is just a point of clarity here. A lot of the games, while the games have location, places, narratives, which is all in lore, and that's not dispute. But one thing that, and this is something that the I think Bethesda and Todd Howard and such have all talked about, is that one of the most annoying things is that the scale of Tamriel, the continent, is not what it is represented in lore. So, for example, Daggerfall, okay, the city of Daggerfall in High Rock, in lore, and this is from Arena from the first game, so it still stands. In lore, it's quoted as saying that the populace is about 100,000 people. Obviously, in game, in a game format, that's really difficult to do. And so, one thing that you see from various Elder Scrolls games is they've upped the scale of land mass and such a provinces that it's set in, but of course, it's not accurately depicted in the lore context. So, I'm going to be not so much talking about like the games as such as it's represented, but just general lore and what we know from the games itself. So yeah, for example, we know that in game, if we wanted to cross, say, Skyrim from Eastmarch, Windhelm to Solitude, from east to west, in game that would take probably like half a day, right? In game, half a day in the game time. Probably in IRL it would take what, a couple of hours. I don't know. Never tried it. But the point is, in the lore context, it might take about several months or a month or two to cross Skyrim. So when I'm talking about these sort of things, it's going to be on sort of a I'm sort of upscaling it to its actual proportions that is represented in the lore, in what's being put on there. And also we have one other handy thing in this bit, is that there is a couple of Elder Scrolls, or one Elder Scrolls novel, which I'm going to be drawing from especially for the early Mede sort of dynasty and their rule, because there's a nice little sort of references to what happened after, and a few subtle hints about how they were viewed, by other races, what who were the players, because the point of this stream is to look at I put from like a Carl Smchitt sort of point of view, that the sort of who are the people who have the power to basically determine the rules, and to break the rules, the international rules, internal rules, whatever you like to call it, and who is the real sort of sovereign, especially in the context of a empire or two competing civilizational forces like the human realms and the elven realms. So that's what we're going to go into, because it's quite interesting. So with that being said, now out of the way, I think I just sort of cleared up a few points there, which we're going to start on its sort of historical context. So we're going to be focusing probably predominantly on Cyrodiil. So that's the central province here. You got Clovia. This is the ethnic groups, I should say, and geopolitical groups. So you have the Clovians, you have the Nebonese in the east. So Clovians in the west, Nebonese. Now they put Imperial in the sort of central bit. Now, yes, that is Imperial, but it's also known as Heartlands. But the people who live there are kind of Nebonese. It's sort of referenced in the I think it's referenced in some of like the Elysian Order content, that after the Saint Alicia's revolt, who was the first human ruler of Cyrodiil after defeating the Alien hegemony, which is like an elven race that worshipped Daedra. It sort of referenced that the people of the Heartlands were pretty much in the Imperial City were these uh, aristocrats, sort of magic wielding aristocrats of Nebonese descent, while the Colovians were more of a hardy sort of hillman, these sort of hillmen sort of people. I've always viewed them as like Armenian or Georgian, that sort of hillman sort of uh, settler group. Very very difficult to conquer and such, and during the Elysian sort of reign, there was this internal conflict between this newly formed imperial project, where the Colovians, and I think it was under uh, a Clovian warlord, um, called, what was his name? It's a very good Slavic name, actually. It is. Oh, bugger. Yeah, I mean, probably just to go start with the Elysian order, the Elysian order. So, an interesting thing about it is after the people will know the sort of general tale that there was during the mythic era. It's sort of known as the era of elves, and so um, places like Cyrodiil was controlled by the Aliens, which wasn't like one nation. It was several city states, several kingdoms, several different powers, but they all belonged to a civilizational group which was distinct from other elves, that from their original homeland. So the aliens worshipped Daedra. They predominantly they were had excellent sort of architects in their ranks. They were able to create the imperial city, which for its time was or would have been a sort of a masterpiece sort of city. And they also were, their success was very much on the backs of humans. So what, so it wasn't just the aliens in High Rock where the Bretons originated. You had the Durrani clan. You had elven settlements. You had like the sea elves and such out in what's now modern day Hammerfell, and then you had the snow elves in Skyrim. And then you had the Chima, which were before the Dunmer, the Dark Elves, but known as the Chima. They were out in Morrowind. So you had just complete elven hegemony and on the whole continent. And at this time, you had the Nedic people who were the humans from Atmora. So these were what the original human group that predates Nords, Bretons, and Imperials, and they arrived from Atmora, and they quickly spread around northern Tamriel and even far south in Cyrodiil, where they would be enslaved by the aliens, and they would be used as grotesque wall art, where they'd be sort of mutilated and sort of strung up around walls and such, and part of sacrifices. But largely they would be just slaves and such. And one thing you find in the Elder Scrolls universe is that humans have a they have a huge sort of advantage of fertility, so they breed more often than elves, and we see this with the Durrani clan, that they in a lot of their sort of law documents, that you have Durrani saying that one of the reasons they end up mixing with the needs in High Rock is because they it's just a question of manpower. And so what you have is, like, in High Rock, which was a unique phenomenon, was that the Durrani were, unlike Daedra worshippers, they were more inclined of magic, architecture, that sort of stuff, and they created a whole new sort of half hybrid race of men and elves, which became known as the Bretons. In Skyrim, around this time, the sort of Nedic Nords there emerged not as slaves, but as first they were massacred at Sarthor, which was a Nordic city, what's near the College of Windhelm, and the companions, the original companions of Ysgramor, who was a warlord who led several hundred companions to return after the Nords had been wiped out in Skyrim to take revenge against the Snow Elves who committed the massacres, and they sort of cut a bloody path out, pushing the Snow Elves back to secluded groves, and even forced them underground to go in alliance with the the Dwemer, who was another subgroup of elves, which were people not dwarves in what we consider dwarves as a separate sort of race, but they were just they're known as dwarves, but they were just a deep elf group, which would more interested in technology and such. But we'll sort of skip that bit because they're that's going off tangent. And so Nords were always sort of heavily independent, and you see sort of in Bruma and places like that, there was a sort of spillover into northern Cyrodiil and into the Colovian estates, and you'll see going forward, because one thing that we have, there's two distinct political entities when it comes to the you have the region of Colovia, which is what we see on the map here. And then you have the Colovian estates, which includes and has included places like Bruma, which is not represented here, but also territory in Skyrim, especially when you look at the rise of Talos, and when he was serving a king, the king of Falkreath, who was a part of the Colovian, or would go on to conquer the Colovian estates, but be sort of classed within that political faction, let's say. So the Colovian, the Colovians were distinct from the Nebonese. One thing that happened under the Elysian Order was that there was an attempt to unify, and the Colovians really resisted that until it got to open hostilities. As the idea was they wanted to ever maintain the distinct culture and sort of independence from the Nebonese sort of aristocracy and the emerging imperial aristocracy in the imperial city, which would have been and still is this huge metropolis. And also, I wonder if it also plays into the fact that the Nebonese majority magic users, would have been against the Colovians, who were very warrior based. And one of the things that the Colovian warlords and warriors taught from a very young age is hunting and sparring, on horseback in particular. And so that there already is this two distinct cultures that are sort of existing. I would definitely say the Colovians have pretty much huge influence from the Nords, and also after the Red Guards, who or the Yakudans as they were, but became the Red Guards when they the sort of the humans who were black and darkened skinned, who settled on what's now Hammerfell. So you see like the forebears and the crowns on the map here, which is the Red Guards. I would say they definitely had an influence just on sort of maintaining this warrior class, this warlord warrior class that dominated cultural and political life there. But yeah, I mean the conflict broke out in the first era, and this was a time when the Elysian Order had sort of expanded into parts of Skyrim, and tried to and sort of went into High Rock as well to, I guess in their minds, probably act as a liberating force against the Durrani clans. Though after the series of conflicts, we see, I would say, a heavy realignment internally. And so when I was talking about the sort of Colovian estates revolting, this came under the leadership of a Colovian warlord, and I think a spare prince. So he wasn't like a direct heir or anything, and that's Rislav Lorich, who was who would go on to lead to I guess sort of lead against the armies of the Elysian Order, and this would very much, even though he was of unimportant sort of birth within the Colovian, as we're told, Colovian stock, his impact was able to maintain this warrior class tradition, but also its fiercely independence. And he created this federation, which would go on to be known as the Colovian Estates, of sort of a unity between these various kingdoms, like places like Kvatch and Anvil, and and Skingrad and stuff like that. So it's it is a important. I would say even you look at successor empires after the first empire, the Elysian Empire, and you look at the Reman Empire, and then the Third Empire under Tiber Septim. The first steps they do to claim legitimacy, because they could just invade, just march on the heartlands and sort of take the imperial city, and then sort of try and work their way around claiming legitimacy from there. But the first acts that they do really is sort of getting the Colovian states either through conquest or through sort of diplomatic means. One other sort of empire as well between all this is, or between the Second and Third Empire, is the reign of the Longhouse Emperors, who were Reachmen, who would conquer what we see up there, the Reach. It was the Black Drake Reach warlord who unified the Reach, marched on Falkreath and marched on Calovia, and created this sort of Reach dynasty, sort of dynastic rule over the empire, which wouldn't last. It would last for about, I think, 3 generations, and then you go into like the events of the Elder Scrolls Online. But even there, they had to acquire the sort of Colovian estates, and it. I mean, I would say, looking at purely sort of political faction wise, it's probably the most. It's the most well defended, so it's one of the hardest ones to really go after. But it's also the ones which are, and if you look at the the Legion, most of the Legion comes from Colovian stock as well. We there's several references to this in Skyrim, at least, that the armor that you see in the sort of leather Roman sort of armor is very much inspired upon that. So it it is something to keep in mind. And I mean, going forward, when we talk to Nathan Hood on his channel, my sort of point is in the real sort of important players in Tamriel politics is the Clovians, and you see if you see the geopolitical thing on their neighbouring, they got Hammerfell to the north, you got Skyrim, you got Reach, you got the trade network access routes to High Rock and everything, and then also sort of coastal connections as well to the to Somerset Isles and Vallon Wood and such. So it's definitely an important. They have immense, I would say, economic and military power, which the Nebonese probably, if you take Nebonese for example, look at their neighbours. There's not much threat from Blackmarsh because they, historically speaking, they're not united. The Argonians are not united. They're quite tribalistic. And also, they are not expansive in the sense of historical precedent. Now, we see this later on when we talk about the after the Oblivion crisis, which I'll go on to next, where they do expand into Morrowind as a sort of a revenge for the Dark Elves enslaving their kin throughout the eras. So we'll go on to that. So yeah, that's my stance there with the Colovians and sort of that importance there. So let's make a start with and sort of the backstory. I was sort of given the backstory. So let's make a start with the topic at hand. So at the end of the hang on a sec, let's switch. So let's switch to a different image. Cool. There you go. So this is the I've been trying to find sort of a map of the of Tamriel after the Oblivion crisis, and I couldn't find it. But this is the closest thing I could find, which probably represents it quite well. So let's give you the lowdown. So the Oblivion crisis was a event where Marius Dagon, a Daedric prince, was working with the sought to conquer Tamriel and Nirn as in general. He was helped by a secret cult called the Mythic Dawn, who assassinated Uriel Septim, the emperor at the time, his heirs. And the Mythic Dawn were made up of merchants, beggars, people of all sort of backgrounds in society, and they were. I mean, their spread of the cult was like Cyrodiil, but we also see that they have like followers in in Skyrim as well, and elsewhere. So, but as we know, the hero, your character in the game, the hero of Kvatch, or the champion of Cyrodiil, and Martin Septim, who was a sort of secret heir, who had the Septim blood, was able to defeat Maerun's Dagon and the cult by breaking the Amulet of Kings, but in doing so, Martin Septim turned into the avatar of Akatosh to defeat Maerun's Dagon, and in turn he perished, but the Oblivion crisis came to an end, and it one thing that really isn't talked about in lore enough, I don't think, is the toll it had on the I would say the toll it had not just on Cyrodiil, but the other imperial provinces. So while the Oblivion crisis was going on, Kvatch, which, again, major city in Cyrodiil, completely wiped, destroyed, and its populace and people in the surrounding areas forced to flee. You also see largely rural land being depopulated because people were fleeing into the cities because of Daedra roaming the roads and everything, and the legions stretched as thin as possible. But also during this, you see that, and this is where you have conflicting reports, is that and this is something I think is probably would be great if it could be expanded on, but we know that the legions, because you have several legions at the time, and they were dotted around Tamriel, and you had there was no legions presence in Cyrodiil during the events of the Oblivion crisis. We have legionnaires, but we don't have like proper legions because, of course, the forts are abandoned and everything. And what was explained at the time, and you hear it in character dialogue, is that the legions were still stationed in places like Skyrim, in Morrowind, particularly Morrowind, and because Morrowind had the ebony mines, which were the most sort of important, and you had the Imperial, the East, you had the East Empire Trading Company, and you had of course the Legion stationed in Skyrim, and I think there's also in Alinor as well. So you had them still sort of stationed, and when the Oblivion Gates opened in Cyrodiil, they also opened up in all other provinces that we know of. We don't know how it went down, unfortunately. We know in Morrowind that there was one. There was this all the houses united, all the various great houses united. They're in the process, I think, House Walu, which was the pro-Empire house, and they held the title of Kings of Morrowind, which was created by the Empire. They were pretty much obliterated during this whole affair because they weren't much of a warrior. They were a house which was dedicated to merchant and trading, so they weren't really used or good when it came to fighting like this. But the thing was, the houses were able to get a giant mud crab to take on Daedra machines and such. And though many were killed, we hear many were killed, and it was it weakened it weakened imperial control because the people of Morrowind felt that the Empire didn't really help, and you see that previous like treaties and pacts were probably just imperial authority was just ignored, as we hear in the lore source. In Alinor, it was also pretty bad. So the Oblivion Gates that opened up there were in many ways worse than what was anywhere else in Tamriel, and probably because of them sort of the high elves magical knowledge and such. And what you see is their capital is completely besieged, and you have tales of Daedra being killed one after another, creating these mountain bodies and such. But unfortunately, they were slaughtered. The entire imperial political class in Somerset Isles was pretty much wiped out, which left a power vacuum for the Thalmor later on to sort of fill. We don't know what happened else really in other. I mean, in Argonia, in Argonia, the Black Marsh, we know that the Argonians, being the sort of rugged swamp people race that they are, the Oblivion gates that opened up there were probably most likely they didn't. There wasn't much success for the Daedra and Mary's Dagon down there. So yeah, that's what happened, and of course, when Martin died, the empire fell to the control of the Blades, the Elder Council, and of course, Chancellor Arcano, who was the high elf that you see in Oblivion. So what we see is at the end of Oblivion Crisis, you begin the fourth era. And the first thing after that they try and maintain order, Chancellor Arcato and the Elder Council, you have the sort of breakdown of imperial authority across the board. During the Oblivion Crisis, it was in Somerset Isles and Morrowind, but it's everywhere at this point, even within sub-regions and within Cyrodiil. You also had the Red Year, or the Red Mountain erupts in Vardenfell in Morrowind, which completely decimates Vivec City and destabilizes the entire province, causing mass sort of migration out to neighboring provinces. You also see at this point, all round about the same time, the empire just begins to completely collapse, and Black Marsh officially secedes from the empire in the year 5 or year 10, fourth era. That's when they completely collapse. Black Marsh leaves the empire, and the Argonians then begin the invasion of Morrowind from the south. Then they completely sort of weakening House Telvanni and House Duress. I think they end up pretty much steamrolling over House Duress, and it's House Redoran who come out on top as the people to stop the Argonians advance, and they end up becoming the most sort of taking over from like House Harlow, who received support from the empire and were the dominant house through just sheer economic reasons, but and cultural reasons. And then House Redoran pretty much on the oldest houses becomes the most senior, let's say, out of all the houses, and sort of I wouldn't say officially become like the main political force in Morrowind, but they definitely become the most prominent. At this time, Arcato, who is the Chancellor, is at this point known as Potentate. So he officially, there's this point where he, as Chancellor, he realizes that he can't just be this sort of appointed ministerial position, and so he takes on the functions of an emperor on the Ruby Throne, and he becomes Potentate. And the last time you saw a Potentate on the Ruby Throne was during the sort of Celessi. So these were the people from Akavir, the Akaviri invaders and such, the legacy of that. And until that sort of, they were sort of, the Akaviri hegemony was overthrown again by the Clovian estates during the Second Era. So yeah, he was Okato was assassinated by the Thalmor, who then initiated the Stormcrown interregnum. So that's the interregnum where the Thalmor take over Alinor and then begin the process of taking over Vanwood, and or influencing Vanwood, because that doesn't officially leave until much later, which we'll get on. But the Thalmor take over because again, there is no imperial authority on the Somerset Isles because they were all pretty much killed during the Oblivion crisis, and so they come in and they reinstitute the historic. Because again, the Altmeri Dominion. There have been several iterations of that, and I believe this is the third one, like the Empire. So, and the faction that has taken over is very much resembling that of. They say it's nationalistic, but I would say it's quite historically elven politics, because and this is important to remember in the Elder Scrolls universe, is that the elves very much view mortality different to how the men view it, and the high elves in particular view it more as a punishment because they were robbed of divine standing. They were very much robbed of having that, and so many believe that the Thalmor wish to, I guess, reconnect with the divines, with the transcendent beings that exist in the Elder Scrolls universe. I mean, that's not always shared with like the other elves group, like the Dark Elves and such, but that's very much a theme. And of course, when they were under the rule of the Septim Empire, which was an empire which was not only just an empire of men, but also an empire which worshipped as one of their chief, because these are the people that the elves want to reconnect with the transcendent divines, and the founding emperor of this empire after death was awarded the title as the god of governance, good governance, and the god of man, and that was Talos, Tiber Septim becoming Talos. And so that was just another slap in the face. And so this, in many ways, when you look at it, it's not surprising that the the Somerset Isles breaks away, because they're very much never really were integrated, because it's an older civilization than any of the other sort of human provinces in Tamriel. And so during this time, he also Octano, who was a high elf himself. So I imagine there was definitely feeling of sort of treason, because Octano was very much a loyal servant of the Septims, a loyal servant of the Empire and its military and political institutions. So and cultural and religious ones. So there would have been this deep, I would say, deep-rooted hatred for him, and it was a very symbolic assassination. And so after the assassination, the Elder Council, which was the main political body that sort of held it just fractured into petty infighting over the Ruby Throne, and we hear that there were several attempts to of claimants to the throne, and you had what was it? You had because this is the time when this was around 410 when you had the sort of collapse. By a year of fourth era, year 17, Titus Mede a Colovian warlord, and bandit. Sort of started life as a bandit, and then sort of raised a bandit army, went on to conquer, and then conquered the imperial city. Is then he is crowned emperor, and the the funny thing is though that he conquers what is it? He the previous emperor under him, as the previous emperor or self-proclaimed emperor, was a chap called Thulus the Gibbering, who was Nibonese, and the elder councillor at the time was majority Nibonese, and so that's quite an interesting political dynamic because during the collapse, the Ruby Throne sort of went back to its Elysian roots of being more aligned with the Nibonese culture, and when Mede, who's Colovian through and through, ascended to the throne, that there was a great. It took him time to persuade the elder council to class him as a liberator and not a conqueror, and that was very important for him. And there was also another rival during this time called Edar Olin, who was a was just another. Not much known about him. I think he was a Nebonese who raised an army about 2000 to recapture, but Titus Mede dealt with him. And during this time, Titus Mede the First, who I think was a very good emperor out of all of them, because during this time he was able to produce the heir called Atribus Mede, who we'll get into. He also had a brother, which is not mentioned, but it's just mentioned that there is two princes. Titus Mede had a brother who was carefully monitored. He was relegated to a Colovian hunting lodge where he was monitored by the Medes, Pentulus Oculatus. So Mede creates this, I guess you could say, like KGB style force, different from the Blades, where in the past the Blades acted as a specialist military unit on the battlefield, intelligence gathering, and all-round sort of bodyguards. The Pentulus Oculatus were like this sort of chosen men from his own ranks who were they're more heavily inclined to be secret police, and they would just monitor him, make sure that he wasn't attempt to usurp, during his reign, he was able to capture. So during his time, the Colovian estates and the imperial city was the only realm sort of within his control. From there, he was able to reaffirm control over Cyrodiil, especially getting places like Chorrol, Bruma, and Lilwyn in the south, which would become very successful independent city states, back into the fold. And then from there, he spends much of his reign getting Skyrim, High Rock, and God, I forgot the name now. Hammerfell, back into imperial control, which is it happens quite easily because in those provinces there's not like one united figure. It's all very much decentralized, so it's easier to conquer. And he also goes on to somewhat reaffirm imperial control over Morrowind, but it's sort of not fully explained. It's still technically an imperial province, but he sort of makes a deal with the houses there to to be classed still as an imperial. The citizens of Morrowind are still imperial subjects, and then he also goes on to conquer elsewhere, and also makes moves in Valenwood as well, where or Valenwood, where of course the Ultimary Dominion are also making it. So you have these proxy conflicts as well. And the only places that he couldn't sort of recapture was Alinor, Argonia, and to reaffirm absolute dominance in Morrowind. But more or less, he reconquers much of the empire at that point. And during this time, you have the Umbriel crisis, which is this floating city that's every where it goes, it creates huge death and destruction. And that's where you have Atribus Mede, his son, who is he was described in the novels and in sort of hero legend as this heroic prince who would engage in battles with brigands and rivals and bandits and raiders and such. And he would be the greatest fighter, and he would have his own like dragon guard, which were elite group that he would handpick, and that he would only, and that the only way they could join him is if he could if he could beat them in in hand-to-hand conflict. Though it turns out that he wasn't the great martial sort of military man that made out to be, because instead what it turns out is that Titus Mede, his father, pays all these bandits and rivals and even his own men to pretend that this has happened, because the idea is that if they could have this, number one, it makes the prince more desirable as a successor, so there'd be less chance of a usurper coming along to take the throne, knowing that the prince is like this uber chad fighting machine. But also it enables this I guess you say amongst the people, the loyal imperial subjects, this morale boost. It's very much described as in the book as a morale boost for that. And of course, Atribus, during the events of the Umbria crisis, he's captured, and he discovers that that his whole life has been this lie, because he hasn't the skills or anything else like that. And what I do like about him is he actually does acknowledge this, and he's not a character who is arrogant or rude or anything. He's actually a very sort of humble individual, and knowing that this is not real, he is able to reconnect back to reality by actually training up and then committing a real heroic act and everything. So I would say the novel is actually quite a good one, because it's about character development for him, and he rescues this Breton woman who we assume he goes on to marry because there's a love interest there, and but there's not much known about any heirs from that. It's something that should be explored in lore. And then we go on to Titus Mede II, who I know that Apostolic Majesty and a few others have very strong opinions on, because he's seen as, he is probably one of the worst emperors going, and he his reign. You had the Great War. You had by this point, Valenwood was completely sort of seceded to the Somerset Isles. Elsewhere, which had gone independent at that point. So we assume maybe between that time, imperial authority collapsed in that region. Was then admitted to the Ultimary Dominion after the two moons, which were disappeared, which are very important to the sort of Khajiit culture, was restored, and the Thalmor took credit for that. So they were you had the Ultimary Dominion consisting of three former imperial provinces, and you then had, which then sort of this sort of rising power in the south, of course, led to the Great War, where the Ultimary Dominion were able to capture, southern Cyrodiil. They were, marched into Hammerfell, and then were able to capture the imperial capital. The emperor was able to muster forces north, and were able to repel and recapture. You had the Battle of the Red Ring, where this huge sort of, I guess, like I might imagine in my mind, like a war and peace battle, where they're all like the battle of Gondor or what have you in Lord of the Rings, where they were able to recapture and destroy the Ultimate army. But at that point, both forces were, I guess you could say, completely depleted. But then, in a sort of bizarre turn, the Titus Mede agrees to sign the White Gold Concordat, the initial agreement where Talos worship was banned, and the various other things as well, that the blades were to be disbanded, and that the Ultimate Dominion had sort of free control to operate, to enforce Talos worship banning in imperial provinces, and to basically just to stop the war, and also to agree territories gained by the Dominion in Hammerfell. Now, two things happened during this time. Number one, the Reach broke away, sort of wiping out the Nords in that sort of hold in Skyrim. The Reach folk broke away in an uprising, and then, of course, in Hammerfell they refused to stop fighting and actually felt betrayed by the Empire, which then led to, of course, Hammerfell seceding from the Empire. And we then come into the time of Skyrim, where you had Nord militia under Ulfric Stormcloak and such. We'll go into this. I think we're getting too close to sort of Nathan Hood's territory, where we'll be going into that a bit later. So I'll leave that for now. I mean, looking at the Mede dynasty, though, I would say that Mede the First was probably the most politically savvy. He had, being a warrior king and such, he had that understanding of military skill and just, I guess you say, sort of barbaric levels of of power that he wasn't really challenged, and he was able to, as say, reconquer and such. And I do think that because of that sort of warrior-like mindset, I think people like why Skyrim very much respected the Nords of Skyrim respected his sort of power base and everything. So it's definitely something I think it sort of reaffirms my point about the Clovian estates being the real power brokers and all this. The only thing was, though, and I think it was, just the effects of imperial sort of problems, was that Vardenfell and the Elven realms were there was always these contradicting civilizational forces between the men, the beast, and the Elven realms, and I think the Oblivion crisis highlighted that, and effectively people just return during the moment of crisis, during the sovereign is he who makes the exception, and you had this great point where everything was turned on its head and it was out of the ordinary in conflict, that the people in those provinces returned to what they historically and culturally knew, and that was their own group. And I think that's what, and even one thing I would say under the Mede dynasty is it wasn't like the Third Empire. And I know it's still referred to as the Third Empire, but in reality, it was the Mede Empire because it was an empire based on Clovian values and Clovian-like society. And it's probably why going forward, it struggled to hold on to parts of Skyrim, and why it struggled and it failed to hold on to Valenwood elsewhere, and of course Hammerfell, because it wasn't like the Septim Empire. It wasn't an empire based on a transcendent contract between the gods and this emperor and this family of people, of rulers, who had territories in the imperial city, who were also title holders in Skyrim and in Solitude and places like that. It didn't have that transcendent nature. So that's that. Thank you everyone for people who are listening and people playing catch up. I was going to make a short stream, but this is my point. This is what I wanted to put out there. So thank you all very much, and I will see you later.